blow the man down, bullies, blow the man down. To me way, hey, blow the man down.
Ahoy, mateys.
And welcome as we start this amazing voyage in our new unit on evolution. Just a real quick video to introduce a couple of ideas here, and then we'll be getting into bigger details as we move through the unit. So, without further ado, hey, it worked. Variation. This is going to be one of the themes that we're going to be looking at in this unit, and it's one that we can observe every single day as we look around us. If you take a look at the people you run into today, note the differences among everybody: hair color, eye color, height, builds, all sorts
of hair.
Yeah, amount of hair, color of hair, even down to inclinations, right? Certain personality types or abilities. There's lots of variation out there, and it's not just humans; it's all living things. There's variation out there. So think about it this way too. This is actually I see what you do here, Hamele, with your notes, getting all these things together. So you don't look exactly like your parents. Hopefully not. Otherwise, you might want to look into whether or not they've cloned you, or they've cloned themselves, and that's what you are. But anyway, that's a rare case. So we've got your parents you look like your parents, and that's because that's where you got your genetic information. You don't look exactly like them because, well, there's variation in there. We got some of your mom DNA from mom, some of it from dad, and then we've got mutations that pop up along the way. What we really want to focus on here, though, is a concept called heritable variation. That is, differences among individuals in a population due to their genetics. The genetics can be passed on from parent to offspring, and therefore it can be it can be acted upon by the environment in the process of natural selection. So we need to remember from our last unit how DNA codes for information, how to make proteins, and those proteins then go do their jobs, which result in our phenotypes, our observable physical traits.
Yes, or what Kevin just said in 10 seconds, everything's different around us, and we pass it on to our kids.
That's what I said.
That's why these videos are so long.
You said Mr. Kemmeter can go first, so I went first.
Okay, so how do we explain this great diversity, right? We just said there's a ton of diversity, not only within a species like us humans, but among all sorts of organisms. And we'll be talking about this guy Darwin a lot. And he is basically the guy who proposed this theory of evolution that we're learning about. And there's some other competing theories at the time of how this all happened, right? Before we kind of settled on this theory and said, yep, this one really explains it. We had some competing theories from one guy, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Noticed that species changed and that organisms were adapted to their specific environments. And so he had kind of a slightly different idea as to how all of these changes happened. And it wasn't that you had DNA and you inherited it from your parents necessarily. They didn't know about that at that time, but he observed the giraffes with the really tall necks. Their offspring also had really tall necks. So he's thinking, okay, these giraffes in their lifetime stretched their necks really, really tall to reach all those leaves. And then they passed that on to their offspring. So clearly the best course for a giraffe is to stretch their neck really, really, really tall so that their children will also inherit that very tall neck. So, you might as well start thinking about what sorts of things can you do in your life that, could be good for your children.
So how come when I was younger, I looked kind of like The Rock, right?
Yeah.
Big lifter. Yeah. How come Rachel and Logan aren't massive then?
Right, yeah, you would think that if you were, lifting weights every day, you're making those gains, that your children would just be super buff, right?
Yeah,
that's what Lamarck's claiming.
We know that doesn't work, right, guys?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. We know genetics. He did not know about genetics and how it worked at that time. He was just going on what he saw and the observations he saw, trying to come up with his best explanation, and that's how science works.
Yeah.
Turns out he wasn't right.
Man. I hate it when that happens.
He was trying, and he was being creative, and that's what it's about. Who time has shown what is right. At least he had the basic ideas, right? We've obviously filled in more details over the years and decades and century. What is it, 180 years now?
18... Yeah.
We'll insert the year here. Okay. So Charles Darwin sailed aboard the HMS Beagle, His Majesty's ship, the Beagle, back in the mid-1800s. And we can see his route here from England down around South America and up over here. And right here, pretty famous set of islands called the Galapagos Islands. But then he sailed, past Australia and Madagascar and Africa and all over the place, seeing all sorts of differences around the world. Pretty sweet job. And he saw some of that same stuff that Lamarck saw, that the world was different. We live in a world of diversity. We have different environments, different organisms living in the different environments. Do you think you'd see a muskox in the desert? Probably wouldn't do too well, right? Wouldn't be able to get rid of its heat too well.
Maybe on Tatooine.
Maybe on Tatooine, yes. But then we've got, moist, wet areas, very wet areas. Would the muskox survive well here?
With a really long snorkel.
Would the whale survive in the desert?
With a really long opposite of a snorkel.
No. So what he saw was lots of diversity. Okay. There's some pretty weird things out there in the world. He saw lots of diversity out there in different environments and different organisms, but he also saw some similarities. Like when he got to the Galapagos Islands, he saw these tortoises. They're all tortoises. Okay, they all get the shells and the long necks, and they move slow and all that kind of stuff. But he noticed some very distinct differences between those tortoises on some different islands around the Galapagos Islands. And he saw that with a lot of things wherever he sailed, he saw a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. And along with some other things that was coming up in science at the time with geology and the age of the earth and how erosion creates canyons and things like that, it started his mind percolating on, how did we all get to be here the way we are today? Because you can look back at fossils and things like that of things that looked very similar to, but a bit different than what we saw today, or something very different. It's like, well, how did this change happen? What's going on? Can we explain the mechanism for that? And he's came up with that, and that's what we're going to learn about in this unit. Particularly, we'll get to that when we get to part 2, and we'll talk about the evolution by natural selection, which is the core of Darwin's idea and still the core of evolutionary science today. And you guys see why we've got the captain's hats on today? Because he sailed on the Beagle.
I think we should have just, each of us had a pet dog beagle.
Would have been more fun.
Yes.
But these
Till next time.
Blow the man down.
Ahoy.
And all of us coming to see you again. Oh, give me some time to blow the man down. So we'll blow the man up and we'll blow the man down. To me way, hey, blow the man down. And we'll blow